Thank you, Amelia, and good morning, everybody. I'm glad we have a nice turnout this morning. Our speaker today is Jeremy Schmidt, who's the Grounds and Research Supervisor at Juniper Level Botanic Garden. Juniper Level is the nonprofit 501c3 component of Plant Delights Nursery, in case you don't know that. Jeremy is from Peoria, Illinois, and he studied horticulture at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, and then he attended the Longwood Gardens program at the University of Delaware. He is known to most of us as being the lead guy on the installation of the crevice garden at Juniper Level. That garden was recently completed, and he and other staff members are currently underway in planting new plants, many of which were grown from seed from the Denard Seed Exchange. Jeremy has an article in the spring upcoming issue of the Norris Rock Garden Quarterly on his experiences of the past 2 years in working on the crevice garden, some of the failures, some of the successes, and some of the lessons learned. And that issue of the quarterly will be out about April 1st. Jeremy has also participated in several botanizing trips in the Southeast with members of the staff of Plant Delights Nursery and Juniper Level Botanic Garden, focusing primarily on looking at trilliums, so looking for trillium populations. And he's here today to talk about some of those plant explorations and to tell us about some of the trillium populations that he wrote about in the current issue of the Trillium. So please welcome Jeremy Schmidt.
Well, as Bobby said, Juniper Level Botanic Gardens have been for about 11 years, and in that time I've learned a lot about trillium. Three parts to trillium hunting: the taxonomy, the botany, and the horticulture of it. How many people have trillium in their garden? A lot of people. So it's special to a lot of people, especially right now. Certainly, I would guess that it's most everybody here. It's your favorite plant in the garden right now. Trillium's been a favorite plant for a long time. Carl Linnaeus, at the time of the birth of modern taxonomy, in 1753, published Trillium erectum and Trillium sessile. However, even now, that genus remains unsettled, unexplored, undocumented. There's a lot of assumptions made about trilliums that just, as taxonomists especially, we need to sort out. 4 new species have been published since the 1990s, and several more new species in the Cuneatum and Trillium pusillum complexes are still waiting to be published. So Trillium houstingii, published in 2008, was originally discovered within sight of a McDonald's. This new one in the Trillium pusillum complex, which is or is about to be published, was found at a South Carolina nuclear plant. Trillium tennesseeense, the edge of someone's lawn. And there it is in the edge of someone's lawn. It's amazing. They're still there. There's still new species in our own backyards. Trillium delicatum, found on a Georgia hunting preserve. We discover new and distinct populations pretty much every time we botanize. New species, hybrid swarms, the way that one population blends into another. And over the years, these were or are often ignored, misidentified in herbaria vouchers, or called one thing when they should be another. Let's look at a couple of these populations where we found tremendous variation, new species, potentially hybrid swarms. In northeast Georgia, on the Savannah River tributary. We've gone there twice. We believe at this time that there are 2 or more undescribed species. We have identified 7 overlapping populations in 20 square miles. At one of the sites, we found trilliums that were very narrow-petaled, usually red-flowered, and didn't seem to offset much. You only had 1 stem, usually 1 or 2 stems per clone. But very narrow petals. You can't look at that plant and say that that really belongs to any one species. At another site nearby, We found trilliums that in many cases had wider petals. Some of them seemed to clump more. And occasionally we found clones with green, yellow, green, you name it, every kind of green and yellow flower you can imagine. At another site, narrow lanceolate petals. Looked a lot like the Cajun Trillium ludovicianum, which doesn't occur naturally for at least 500 miles from that site. Occasionally we found an anthocyanin-free specimen, basically one that had nothing but yellow and green in it. Another site is a small young population, right in the middle of all the other populations that we found. And it had every characteristic that every other site seemed to contain. Narrow petals, wide petals, yellow flowers, red flowers, clumpers, singular. It was all there, plus the overall narrowest petaled forms that we found anywhere. Fascinating. And the population itself, again, was young because it occurred where the pines were young. It actually made no sense that there were trilliums there at all. So following up on this amazing site near the Savannah River, we found herbaria records that exist for nearby populations that are unfortunately underneath 50 feet of water for the last 60 years. But former botanists who tackled these populations, they didn't know what it was. They called it Cuneatum maculatum, even Viridae, which doesn't make any sense. But we believe these trilliums are speciating. That those bottom two pictures, that's from a population about 60 miles away from this one that actually appear very similar. So we feel that in the Savannah River Valley, we have a much larger range of this umbrella of genetics. Needs a lot of sorting out. We're excited. We can't wait to go back. Another great population that will always stick in our minds is a population we found on the Tennessee-Alabama state line. Literally. It's a 1 acre population in the Cuneatum freemanii complex. Had the most diversity within a single species, indefinitely in quotes, that we've ever encountered in the field. Narrow lanceolate petals on some. Might be able to mistake that maybe for Alludium. Wedge-shaped petals on another, similar to Cuneatum. Spatulate flowers like Maculatum. In fact, there's a Maculatum record taken from the area, but that, again, is not in the range of Trillium maculatum. So something's going on there. Also, the flowering time is different than populations at a similar elevation, very close by, and a different floral scent. So there's a lot of taxonomic indicators that say something about this population is very different. One thing this site can definitely tell us is that a single herbarium sheet, it can't define a population necessarily. 3 pressed samples might point to 3 different species. And while we think this might be an overlap between Ludium and Cuneatum, there's definitely a speciation event going on here. But this is a great example of why it's important to actually get out there into the field and hunt for Trillium in the wild.
Jeremy?
Yes.
So what is a speciation event?
It's the point at which, not a point, but as genetics begin to settle out, would be my best way of defining it. Definitely want to run that by Zach and Tony. They can say it more eloquently than I can. But if you have 2 different species that hybridize and then maybe come out the other end finally and settle back out into a more stable species. But I guess at a very basic level, we know that species change over time. And so what we know is a very typical Trillium cuneatum, perhaps 10,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, it didn't look exactly the same. So it's changed over time. Maybe it looked completely different. Maybe it didn't exist at all. So new species come on the scene. It just usually takes a very long time. Eastern Georgia population. We can describe this best as a hybrid swarm. So perhaps if it is speciation, it might be more the early stages of it. about a quarter-acre population. It's not a big area, but it's on a 150-foot limestone bluff above the Savannah River. We tried to find it twice before, having gotten a tip about this thing. We missed it by 300 feet pretty much both times. We parked too soon, or we parked on the wrong side of the road. So close. But when we finally saw it, we already knew it was something really different, really special, from 50 paces out. It was amazing. Greenbrier has never posed so little hindrance to get into a population as for this one in eastern Georgia. It's radically different. We've never seen anything like it. It's one of those times when you just got to look at each other and say, are you seeing this? We were blown away. We could not believe what we were seeing. That is a big trillion. It's a very big, that's a quarter. Yeah. Every plant in this population of thousands was somewhere on a hybrid spectrum that looked like something between Trillium lancifolium and Trillium maculatum, both of which do occur in the area. In fact, the two times before that we missed this site, we found Trillium maculatum-ish, but it's in the area. And then lancifolium, according to herbarium records, is nearby. So the lancifolium types, sometimes they look very similar to lancifolium, but they were usually a little larger plants, and their rhizomes are actually quite thick compared to a typical lancifolium rhizome. And the maculatum types, sometimes their foliage was rather similar, but their flower petals weren't quite right for maculatum. And the entire gradient, pretty much every single plant there, it showed that hybrid vigor that you get a lot of times. Bigger plants, they were huge, as you saw with that plant with a quarter on it. There could be more species hidden in the mix. We don't know. We're going to keep hunting for answers. And there's a nice patch of those trilliums up on that limestone bluff. Beautiful plants. What is taxonomy? It's defined as the classification of something, especially organisms. We believe taxonomy is a conversation that needs to be had with entire living populations in their natural situation, in the wild, in situ. Much like humans, every group of trilliums speaks a little bit of a different dialect. And you can't thoroughly and accurately understand what they're saying in just an herbarium sample, something that's dead and pressed and smells like mothballs. It's a good start, but it's important to, if you really want to have a conversation with something on a first name basis, you've got to be there in front of them face to face. And that's how it is with us and trilliums. And then the environmental consistency within a single botanic garden. We continue that taxonomic discussion with representatives from trillium populations spanning the entire southeast United States. So then you kind of get all of those genetics, all those trilliums together in one room, and you can have a very detailed conversation. So at Juniper Level Botanic Garden, the ex situ conservation continues where taxonomy meets pointillism. We see trilliums, every representation of an umbrella of genetics is a dot on a map. A literal map of the southeast United States. And we're painting a detailed, groundbreaking, pointless picture of the genus Trillium as it occurs in the southeast. You put enough dots on a map, something starts to come into focus. Linnaeus composed a universal language to name, communicate, and celebrate the living world. Trillium were among the first words spoken in that language of love. We passionately share our love and understanding of the genus freely in hopes that everyone will know Trillium by name. That was taxonomy, so let's talk about botany a little bit. Well, the year is 2019, and the southeast is not like it once was. It's been invaded, it's been clear-cut again, eroded, farmed, mined, impounded, subdivision, and Atlanted. In that case there on the right. There's, I believe that's Clark's Hill Lake. That was the Savannah River at one time. And that is now a lot of water and a lot fewer plants. It's great if you're a bass fisherman. But, you know, if you were a trillium, it's not long gone. So our exploration for trillium in situ is dependent on our ability to identify those remnant and recovering ecosystems that are amicable to trillium. Being aware of our surroundings, being mindful when we are in nature, allows us to connect to those living networks. As we walk through the woods, we have a heightened awareness to what is around us. A lot of that is learned, a lot of that is felt. But we listen to what is around us is saying. And we see the forest for the trees, we see the forest for the trillium. Trillium populations, they were pretty much almost everywhere in the southeast at one time prior to European colonization. And now much of the southeast has been developed into something that limits or excludes natural populations of trilliums. And we get it. We drive cars too. But we want to look for sites that have been unburdened, unaltered by recent human activity. We also want to look for presence of limestone, and we like trash piles, to be honest. Mature deciduous forests are a good place to look. If it's an older forest, then obviously it hasn't been clear-cut in a while. And most trillium species in the southeast prefer the canopy of deciduous trees over conifers. So you can actually do that, a lot of that, from your desk. You can zoom down using Google Maps, and you can tell where are the deciduous forests that seem older, and where are the grid pine forests, where are the young loblolly pine forests that very little biodiversity occurs in anymore. But you can create a flexible itinerary before even hitting the road in search of trillium. As we're on the road, we look for sites that probably have a lot of calcium, and you can do that by seeing plants that are visible from a greater distance away, like Fraser. That needs calcium. And of course, trash. We look for trash piles. For some reason, there's something about trash piles. There's going to be trillium there. It's hard to see in this picture, but if one was to zoom in, that's trillium right there. It's a lot of them. But I guess the more I've thought about it, it indicates that a place is ignored or undesirable for further development. It's a piece of nature that's been discarded along with the trash that litters it. And that's a great thing if you're a trillium, by the way. There's a big old trillium right there. It's happy. It's happy there. So what are some sites that we found trillium around trash? In the mountains north of Knoxville, Tennessee, big population of Trillium luteum, Trillium cuneatum, and then they are also hybridizing Trillium luteum and cuneatum. And looks like someone needed their energy drink and ignored the trillium that was right there. That is a huge trillium, by the way. That Tennessee-Alabama state line, there's speciation occurring in an old tractor tire. And we're fine with that. And poison ivy, yes, there's always poison ivy. Trilliums, so Taliaferro County, but it's actually pronounced Tolliver, go figure. There's a probable undescribed species of trillium in the Trillium freemanii complex growing with a creepy doll. Again, trash pile. We didn't have any pictures of the site, but fortunately, I've got the creepy doll. So, it's very creepy too, and it's a little unnerving now. But there was some tulips. Okay. You never know. Brand new species of trillium, and someone don't trash on it. I guess in a way that's okay with us.
Jeremy?
Yes.
No question. What actually do you mean when you say like the Freemanii complex?
Yeah. Okay, so here's, until the last few years, and actually this is something that Tony Avent really, to my knowledge, got started. It was assumed, even up till now, that the range of Trillium cuneatum is much larger than it actually should be. And so over the next decade or so, there will be probably at least 2 species split off of Trillium cuneatum. That is my knowledge. Again, you're going to need to run that by Zach and Tony. They can say it more eloquently than I can. But to my knowledge, there probably aren't any Trillium cuneatum in Alabama. It will probably all be split off into the Freemanii complex. Whether it's called Freemanii and then something else, who knows? But that is one of the reasons that we hunt Trillium. We've got to figure this out. Yes?
Have you actually done genetics? I studied with John Freeman, who worked on all this, so we didn't have that advantage at the time we were collecting.
Correct. That's a great thing about the world we live in now, is that we are able to look at plants in a different way. We do have someone who does genetic sequencing as a friend of Juniper Level Botanic Gardens, and some has been done. I don't know exactly which ones, but again, over the next few years, we're looking at sending him several things, several different populations of Trillium that need that genetic work to really help us figure things out. So it's coming. For example, that Trillium delicatum that I talked about is being published literally a month ago, finally, about 1 month ago. It looks like Trillium decumbens, which we believe it was mistaken for a long time. It is not actually that close genetically to Trillium decumbens. It is actually closer to Trillium steminium, which it looks nothing like. And so, yeah, we're very excited and very thankful that we have someone who is willing to work with us on genetically mapping these things out with us. So, yes, so another really cool site that Zach and I visited in 2015, right?
Yeah.
Kind of on the end of a hydroelectric dam on the Savannah River, a lot like that one that bass fishermen are using now. On a 20-foot tall riprap finger that extends into the woods as part of the dam. And coming out of 65 years now of leaf litter, are Trillium. But it's fascinating. In only 65 years, Trillium have recovered a site, or begun to recover a site, much like a tell. Who knows what a tell is? Like when one city is built on another, essentially. Floral refugees have taken back their home, repatriated the rubble left behind by us. Really cool. And it's hard to see in this picture. Again, oh man, if only we had more pictures, but that is riprap right there. That is actually, this is near the top of a 20-foot pile of riprap. Beneath that riprap, 65 years ago, there was this population of Trillium. So it's kind of like a floral tell. Another site we went to, again, I believe in 2015, there was an abandoned stretch of blacktop. It's about 300 feet long, where a new bridge meant that a road was diverted for a distance. And we believe that this bridge was abandoned for at least 40 years or so. There was about 2 inches of leaf litter, just forest debris, that had accumulated and decomposed on top of blacktop, literally blacktop. And so there were Trillium growing in the middle of the road. It's so cool, and only a few decades. And we like that. We find that fascinating. And yes, it was in the company of a more mature deciduous forest. But strangely, the greatest population of Trillium that we found was on the road and not in the woods around it. Probably because the woods around it were grazed more recently. Sometimes you find Trilliums, again, where you wouldn't think. The kudzu giants of Vietnam in Alabama. Supersized Trillium. Recently there was a road extension cut, something, brand new, beautiful, smooth road. They cut down all the trees, For some reason, we're just like, let's go look up there. It made no sense. But we did anyway. And in full sun, there were trilliums that were supersized. Not that the genetics were any different, but their conditions were above optimal, more optimal than any unmessed up site we'd ever seen. So they clumped better, they grew bigger, they had giant petals. But why? Because they were in full sun, okay, they had great soil, that wasn't removed. They only cut down the trees at the top of the hill, they didn't regrade it. But it was the kudzu that caused the trilliums to be so big. Because the kudzu climbs over and kills anything, any kind of woody plant that needs to be alive in the summer. But it leaves out very late in the spring compared to other plants. So trillium, it has a 1 month, 1.5 month head start on the kudzu. It comes up, it gets full sun, it doesn't have root competition, sun competition. It goes dormant, kudzu takes over, keeps the soil cool, and it feeds it nitrogen directly. It has a huge legume. It is pumping nitrogen from the air into the soil. And those are the biggest trilliums that we've really ever found in the wild. So yeah, nature is paved over when finding a parking spot is more precious than nature. We get it, we drive cars. If a trillium grows in the forest, however, and no one is aware of it, is it really there? I mean, there's two ways to look at it. Yeah, I just, when I'm out in the forest, I imagine the good old days before we came through and cut all the trees down, before we dammed up the rivers. But at the same time, we drove there at 65 miles an hour. I ate food that morning that was harvested from a 1,000-acre field somewhere. So we're part of this. It's not that we can really go back and change it, but we can appreciate what we have. And we can appreciate what we have with all of the things that we've learned at the expense of nature in the past. The electricity that we use to power our computers might come from that dam on the Savannah River. So we use what we have so that we know more about and to be able to celebrate and spread awareness about what we have left. Horticulture and trillium. Few cultivated plants can command such beauty and balance in a garden. Every trillium that we've seen in the wild is beautiful. And every place that we visited, every natural site that we visited was made more beautiful by trillium. That's a pretty cool thing to think about. You don't need to edit trilliums. They're already good to go in the garden as they are. Their wild habits are perfect for the garden. They're not too big, not too weedy, not even Trillium fetidissimum, that's the best kind of weed. And they're not too fragile. But to simply say that a trillium is a nice addition to the garden falls short of their purpose and potential in cultivation. Horticulture is the art and science of garden cultivation and management. In cultivating and managing trillium, we're able to celebrate, examine, and share what we know and love about the plant kingdom, taxonomically and botanically. Trillium are the fulcrum that we're able to balance our multifaceted love for nature, and horticulture is the platform, the balance beam, so to speak. On one end, we can go full taxonomy. We can go crazy with it. All those little tiny details that every little red and yellow trillium tongue is trying to tell us. We love the lively dialogue. On the other end is botany. It's peaceful, timeless, it glows. We can be aware of it. We can surround ourselves with it. And we can understand what nature is trying to tell us about the big picture. Zach pointed out to me, those are all Southeast United States natives. Pretty cool. That's at juniper level. So much can be gained from observing the way that Mother Nature constructs and cultivates her garden. In nature, we hunt questions so that we can cultivate answers. So, all right, horticulture, right? In situ, we hunt for answers. a Trillium discolored carpet on private land in South Carolina between Pickens and Pumpkin Town. I really want to know why it's called Pumpkin Town, by the way. Maybe I should go back there in September, October sometime and see. One of the friends of Juniper Level Botanic Garden, who is not a horticulturist, but an irrigation guru, told us that there was yellow flower Trillium everywhere in the woods around his cabin. So we headed out there, and you know when you see something really amazing, there's a slight delay in your head. You see it, and then your brain processes it and actually says that you're seeing it. So we're driving through what is essentially a pasture in a minivan, and we roll up on this, and as we get closer and closer, we start to see it. And there's that delay of realization, and that sticks with us. And what Zach and I were talking about yesterday was that everything about this day has stuck with us. The humidity, the wind, the amount of sun, the temperature, which birds were singing. It's all there. It's locked away. And it is in that delay between what we were seeing and what we were realizing. That's where it all lies in our memories. We visited the site more than once, documenting. There's a minivan. Is that the second time we're there?
That's the second minivan of the trip.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that was our second minivan trip. The first one died at 3,000 miles. It was exciting. But why were there so many Trilliums around the camp? And again, there are questions. We want to find answers. Well, as we looked closer, it was mowed probably once a year. The forest canopy and the soil were intact, perfect for Trilliums. But all the understory competitors were restrained. In a way, it was similar to the kudzu site. But it tells us that Trillium can survive in the most sparingly of cultivated places, even more so than they would normally thrive in nature if that was untouched. So, horticulture, part of that is cultivation. And JLBG's mission of ex situ conservation is most evident through our propagation and cultivation of Southeast Trillium from garden-collected seed. We collect seed from almost 1,800 different Trillium taxa. That's a lot. To do so, you have to be very efficient. We've got a system. I was going to go through it step by step, but I know we have a time constraint. But we can get it to where we can get most of the seed to germinate late winter after the summer that they're collected. And we can usually get them to bloom between 3 and 5 years after sowing. And this is a tremendous increase in efficiency, time savings, labor savings, but it allows us to learn more about these Trilliums faster and sets us up in a position where we can share Trillium quickly and a lot of them. Trillium is a language of love. Yeah, the taxonomy of Trillium is a language of love. We hope to know every Trillium by name. There's a lot of names out there. There are more names than we know now, so we're going to keep learning them. And botany is recognizing the relationship that plants have with their world. We are mindful of how Trilliums fit into their ecosystem. And we believe that horticulture is the proliferation of what we learn in nature. Trillium grow here. I want to thank Zach Hill and Tony the event for helping me put this, the wording together. And of course, Tony and Zach took 99.9% of these pictures. But thank you for bearing with me.
Some questions?
Yeah, questions. I'm going to hold this dial while I answer them. Right? Yeah. Yes, Cindy.
When you were talking about horticulture, at the very first slide of that beautiful white remodeled Trillium, is that one available at the line?
We hope that its seedlings will be available in the next 5 to 7 years.
I gotta stay healthy.
Yeah, that's a stunner, isn't it? Yes.
When you see these big swaths of trillium, like around this cabin, so how have they propagated? How have they gotten that big?
Seed mainly. Although we didn't, for whatever reason, see many seedlings while we were there. Trillium discolor is not, it's not a runner. It is at best a clumper, but it does not clump very much. And so at some point, pretty much all of those plants that you see, 1 to 3 stems, were a seedling.
From ants? What
Oh,
propagates?
ants love them, yellow jackets love them. It is in the native range of Trillium discolor, squarely within it. So it's speciated, it was there, and then it continues to proliferate around the woods. Once some of that competition was taken away from understory plants, got a little bit more sunlight, a little less root competition, and seeded more prolifically. The seedlings were more successful. Beauty ensues. Yes?
Speaking of efficiency, and propagating all these many different kinds of trillium, do you force them all to grow in the same kind of substrate, or do you take notes and do each one that you collect where it came from kind of soil?
We like to take note of what soil they were growing in situ. But we find that you can propagate and grow beautiful trilliums, very large trilliums, in soil between a 6.2 and 6.5, 6.7 pH. Put a good calcium to magnesium ratio. Just good composty garden soil. They seem fine with that. I think that there could be a slight advantage to be had one way or another. But what we found with many of our over 24,000 different kinds of plants growing in the garden from all over the world, it's not about copying the exact situation where they came from. It's about finding the happy medium that you can grow as many different kinds of plants in as possible. And that is the soil of Juniper Level Botanic Garden. We want to grow the best from all worlds.
So you don't think there's any tug on the DNA over a period of years because of the substrate?
Certainly not upon one clone. A clone will either grow well or it doesn't. If you have 10, 100, 1,000 generations of sexually propagated plants that perhaps a seed keeps falling in the garden, certainly over time there would be natural selection. One might be more acclimated to a soil than another, but that would be minimal and certainly past any of our lifetimes. Yes, Jerry?
So about them, you said just like deciduous forest, kind of
Mhm.
like the wood sort of layer. Where, like in our region, where would you see these sort of plants?
Where there aren't that many pine trees.
What's his question?
Where do you find in this area, where do you find those big deciduous forests? And they abound. That is throughout the southeast. A good part of the southeast was deciduous forest. So again, we search for those remnants. And I would say that they are rather equally and randomly scattered about. Yes, Gabe?
So when you cite trillium in the garden, you look for locations with less root competition, is that true or is it not?
Can you repeat the question?
Root competition, we're citing for reduced root competition in the garden. Is that
Right.
okay? Well, we irrigate at Juniper Level Botanic Gardens. So when we are in the field searching for populations of trillium, we search for plants that seem to, we search for areas that have water. So you can usually tell in a forest where it is drier consistently than versus where there seems to be more water. In a garden situation, you can control all of that. Root competition is not as important as making sure that there's enough soil to grow in and that it is irrigated as needed. So that depends on what you plant. If you want to plant something under a big pine tree, for example, that's going to own that soil. A big maple tree, that's going to own that soil. So unless you irrigate, you might have trouble. In the wild, it's a little different. Yes.
I wonder if
you have been able to get access to the Savannah River complex, the nuclear plants near Aiken.
JLBG has not, to my knowledge, been there.
You
But
think
our,
if you could, would you?
Yes.
oh, yeah. Yes.
It's been really
Because it's been
heavily
there for
studied.
what,
Yeah, it's
since
been really
the
heavily.
nineties, the 40s? No.
Yes, in an area that's very true. A nuclear complex, a place that is protected from development further, protected by a barbed wire fence and people with guns. That's a great thing when you have permission to be there, absolutely. And so we would love to be able to botanize those areas. And we know people who do.
Let me add to that one of our folks that we work with was able to get permission to go into the nuclear site, and the trillium that would be published from there, Trillium Telmacola. He went in, there was one population, they're not really interested in preserving it. When he was able to get back in there, the wild hogs had gone in, and there were only 12 plants left of the species in existence anywhere on the nuclear site. We now have one of those in the garden, we've had it for 3 years. So the fact that they really don't care about the wild hogs makes it really difficult. At least plants have been rescued from the site now for preservation.
Yes, in the back.
Do you have a short list in your head of what other genus grows with Trillium and the sequence? We didn't see Mayapples.
Sure, yeah. Well, there's a lot of things going around in my head, but as far as plants, companion plants in the wild for Trillium, many of them were mentioned as part of that Swift Creek hike. The erythronium, the heuchras, mayapples, bloodroot. Start shouting them out.
Dentaria.
Yeah.
Spring green.
Yeah, Claytonia, dentaria, cardamine.
Dicentro.
Dicentra for sure, yeah. Anemonella, another great one. Yeah, sure. Yes.
I have kind of a different question. I'm just fascinated by the mottled leaves, the sort of looks like military camo pattern.
Yeah.
And the wild ginger also has that similar pattern. Do you have any ideas on why the leaves evolved that pattern? What's the evolutionary advantage of that?
I think you may have answered your own question. Camo.
From what? I mean, from grazers?
Yeah, most likely. Certainly not people. It's a little bit modern for that. But no, deer, things like that. Now, serum have other defense mechanisms. They don't taste good to deer, or even really wild hogs, to my knowledge. But a lot of times those patterned leaves, to the best of my knowledge, and maybe someone knows more than I do about this, probably do, that it for something that is colorblind, like a deer are colorblind, right? I thought so. Yeah, that it would kind of break it up. It wouldn't be able to see it as effectively. To the best of my knowledge, deer browse on trilliums. Where there is an overpopulation of deer, the trilliums begin to go away. But yeah, I think that's probably why. And just because it looks cool, right? So.
I mean, to me, it makes it stand out. I mean,
Yeah.
the pattern makes it stand out, so that's why I was wondering.
Yeah, it stands out to us. To a deer, it does not. Maybe perhaps for the same reason that rosemary tastes great to us, but to most other creatures, it does not taste good. So humans are a little different with the way we see things. We've evolved on a little separate path. Fortunately, because of that, we can appreciate trilliums for the beauty that they present. Anything else? Jerry?
So you talked about how when you're finding them at sites, you see a presence of limestone, but then when you were talking
yes.
about the actual, like the pH of the soil, and during one of the questions you said that it's good for like 6.5, 6.6. So like definitely not alkaline, and definitely like not even below, not even above like 7.
What do you mean definitely? Now, there's a range that plants can grow. Every plant fits a little differently within that range and occupies a range of that range. What we like to do at Juniper Level Botanic Gardens is to give plants a condition that facilitates the greatest number of plants possible. In the wild, as we've tested soil, we find soil that's usually 6 to 7 and usually has a good deal of calcium available in it.
So it's the limestone there for the calcium, not for like the alkalinity.
Alkalinity is affected by any cation. So magnesium is a cation. And sometimes there are very basic soils, very way above 7, but the calcium to magnesium ratio is all messed up. And so that's something that we can kind of see. Sometimes you see certain kinds of plants that are more dominant in magnesium soils, even though they're still basic. Yes, Amelia?
How many species are native to North Carolina?
I'm gonna need some help with this.
12 or 13.
You counting record Vatum? Not yet.
Does that vary from the mountains to the coast?
Yes.
What was the answer?
12 to 15, I think, is what we're at right now.
What was the question?
The species of trillium in the state.
Yeah, North Carolina native Trillium species 12 to 15.
How many we find coastal
And they respect the boundaries, so as soon as you get into Virginia, they know if they're crossing. They see the state sign at the road, okay, no, that's, I don't belong
Cecily
there.
decides it's not going to cross into North Carolina.
Correct.
No.
Yeah,
Most
it's,
people have
Just one
fireworks.
star.
yep, yep, no, it's, man-made boundaries, very important things to trilliums, but, yeah, so, yes.
Actually, I brought a book about trilliums, and it's out there on the table. If anybody'd like to borrow it, just let me know. And in reading about that, they were talking about the two basic groups, I thought, the sessile and the stiliate?
Pedicillin.
Pedicillin.
Yep.
So what are the different, what makes
All right,
one
well, let's
category
see.
another?
Right now, I would be a pedicillate trillium, and now I'm a sessile trillium. So the difference is a pedicillate trillium is on a pedestal. So you've got the 3-leaf whorl, and those 3 leaves generally come out of the exact same spot on what is commonly known as a stem, although it's probably not a true stem. But you got all 3 leaves connected at the same point. Sessile trillium, that flower is glued right to it, kind of like a flower on a cactus at Walmart. It's just right there, glued right to that thing. And then a pedicillate one's got usually a little extension of that stem. A pedestal, yes, thank you. And a lot of times then that allows them to nod over like that. So a lot of times you don't usually see flowers pointing down on a sessile group, a sessile type trillium, but you do with the pediculates. And to our knowledge, I don't think there has ever been a case where those two have crossed. I mean, they actually they grow together all over in nature, but they're different enough that they don't ever seem to hybridize. What that really means, I think we're just beginning to figure out. Yes, Jerry?
Could you describe the floral structure? Because is it like the 3 like things that cover the inside of the flower? Those are the petals.
Yeah, I think so. Petals, and then you've got your sepals
3 sepals.
that are out here like this.
And then inside there's stamen. There's like the normal
Stamens, pistils, ovaries, anthers, yep, all the fun parts.
And with the pedicillate ones though, they're only like 3 petals, right? When they are turned over, like what happens?
They still have sepals that are.
Yeah, yeah, it's just,
Yeah.
it's the same, it's just a more of a flower, usually.
And it's the same, it's just on a pedestal. Any other questions? Thank you very much.